Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's great to have you here on our live stream. We're going to be talking about a very important subject, part of our lives, to be happy. We want to be happy in all different areas. Do we have a healthy viewpoint after coming out from the Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, we just mentioned that name, Jehovah's Witnesses. If anything we say here, because we will be talking and looking at a few things from the Jehovah's Witnesses and their viewpoint of it, if anything like that affects you, please reach out to somebody you can talk to. We don't have to be scared about this subject, even though we may have been part of them for most of our lives. Today, though, we have a very wonderful guest who's going to help us to look at a healthy view of sex. And that's something that many don't really have, whether they've been a Jehovah's Witness or not. So for those who have been Jehovah's Witnesses, let's bring our guest on and let's have a chat. Here's our guest, Serena. How are you this morning, Serena?
I am doing well. Thank you.
Oh, that's good. Well, it's nice to have you here. So just briefly, we know that, as we can see on your title, that you run the free range sex movement.
Yep.
So can you briefly outline what a healthy view of sex is like?
Well, I'll do my best.
Okay.
What I do is I help people to get intuitive and learn how to have intuitive sexuality confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big, huge part of having a healthy relationship to your own sexuality. Because I think we'll get into it more later, but coming from the background that we come from, there isn't a whole lot of direction on even understanding what intuition is. You know, I remember thinking that it was something that was kind of just really elusive and ununderstandable, and it didn't seem like something that, you know, people talked about women's intuition, but what did that mean, and where was it supposed to be for me when I was a woman? And I still didn't know what it was. So when we're connected to our own inner guidance system, instead of listening to an outer authority, like the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, or any organization that claims to know better than what we know for our own selves, then that's where we run into trouble. Because if you're not connected to your own deep inner wisdom and your own sense of your truth and your connection to your own body, then you can't possibly be making decisions that are aligned with what you need. And it's I've got some sirens down here in the downtown area. Sorry if you can hear the noise.
We can hear you better, so that's fine.
Okay, great. So what I help people with is really learning how to be connected to their own information system within themselves, and how to, you know, really evolve beyond the idea that we shouldn't listen to our hearts. And anyone who has made it out of the Jehovah's Witness organization and culture has followed their heart in some way. And so they're in a direction, in a path where they heard or felt or noticed something was off, and it just wasn't fitting, and it wasn't right for them, and it didn't feel like it was nourishing them. So when we look at sexuality from a lens of health, we're talking about our whole selves. We're taking sexuality as part of the entirety of reality. We're taking sexuality and our sexual desires and our sexual urges and our body parts that are most identified as sexual. We are looking at them as a whole with the rest of us, with our brains and our hearts and our guts and all that we are, instead of separating them out as something dirty, bad, or something to be avoided and neglected, or I mean, I can't speak for the male-bodied experience, but for female-bodied experiences coming out of the Jehovah's Witness religion and so many other similar cultures like Mormons and Scientologists and such, women don't even know what they look like between their legs. They might not have even felt what they're like down there until they need to manage their puberty experiences with menstruation or later when they're giving birth. My mother had friends who didn't know what made a baby until the doctor told her she was pregnant. And she was like, oh, it must be that thing I've been doing since I got married. And
okay, cool. So we've got a brief outline of what a healthy view of it is. And when you have a look on YouTube, when you look around, people struggle with the subject, regardless of what they are. So let's just for a moment, the organization we've both come from, the Jehovah's Witnesses, let's have a look at something that is from a 1978 Watchtower question from readers. Okay. So, does the Bible set forth any specific definitions as to what is moral or immoral as regards to the sexual relationship between husband and wife? Okay, the answer. It must be acknowledged that the Bible does not give any specific rules as or limitations as regards the manner in which husband and wife engage in sexual relations. So if the Bible doesn't say it, why is the Watchtower saying, like they say next, there are brief descriptions of fitting love expressions such as Proverbs, blah, 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 blah. There are texts such as Job, blah, 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 blah. At least provide an indication of what was customarily or normal as regards love, play, and sex relations coincide with what is generally viewed as customarily and normal today. When you look at that answer to their question, is that healthy?
Well, I think it was really healthy at the very start where it said the Bible doesn't really say what we should do.
Yeah. And then it says, is it the responsibility of congregation elders to endeavor to exercise control among congregation members in these intimate marital matters? What does it have to do with?
So they're saying directly from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society that it's up to the elders to control the sex lives of members.
Basically, if I just find the appropriate.
Also acknowledging that the Bible doesn't say what should and shouldn't happen in sex.
Yep.
Especially in marriage in particular. I mean, there's certainly scriptures that talk about, various different pieces of sex, but when you look at the context and when you look at what they're talking about, oftentimes it's just a really twisted, like they took something that was said out of the whole story of where it was, and then they used it to justify their trying to control their congregation.
Yeah. I have to laugh at some of these points. It asks the question, what then of a situation where a married person, perhaps a wife, approaches congregation elders with the complaint that her marriage mate is abusing her? The answer is, if the marriage mate is willing to discuss the matter, the elder, possibly in the company with another elder, can offer to try and help the couple to solve their problem, giving spiritual counsel or scriptural counsel. So we already have established by Watchtower's own terminology that the Bible doesn't say. So your take on that?
I think they used a lot of liberty in interpreting and trying to, again, come from a point of control. And one thing that creates a healthy sex life is consent, informed consent.
Yep.
And when you don't have the information, the full information of what you're saying yes to, or you're not even given a chance to say yes because, you know, the cultural view of sexuality within a marriage with the Jehovah's Witnesses is that a wife needs to perform her wifely duties and that the man has the final say on everything in the household, including sex. So if you think of sexuality or a sex act as something that should have and is naturally requiring of consent, informed consent, to be able to give a fully free yes, where the other person isn't under the control of someone else, where the other person isn't obligated to say yes, then how much sex, even in marriage, within that culture could be called consensual?
So
I
can
know
you
for a
just,
fact that there are many, many women who were forced or coerced into having sex, even, you know, even within their marriage, were forced by their husbands. And, you know, what we call that in the mainstream culture is rape. And unfortunately, that is a common occurrence in religious cultures like the one that we came from.
just go back to the consent side of things.
Yeah.
Okay, you briefly described it. What happens if a person doesn't know what consent is? What
Well,
could we, in a practical way, encourage them to do? To research so that they do know what consent is really all about.
yeah, absolutely. To maybe hire someone like me who's from the background and knows the ins and outs of what types of mentalities and perspectives have led to that kind of culture. And you don't need to totally understand the roots in order to be able to learn how to navigate forward. But learning about consent is something that is easily found online in different places. There's something called Betty Dotson's Wheel of Consent. And that is a very good example of kind of getting a beginning knowledge of what consent is about. It's really, you know, do you know what you're saying yes to? Have you communicated clearly with the person you're engaging with? And the truth is that the real place it needs to start is inside your own self. Do you want what you're being offered? How can you say yes if you aren't even clear on what you want? If you're confused about what your desires are you saying yes just because you don't know? Because informed consent and the consent that they talk about in sex positive cultures and sexuality education is a consent where you are clear. You have a clear yes before you say yes. And you have, if it's maybe, then it's a no. And if you're dealing with someone who you have a really strong, beautifully loving connection to, and you're in relationship and you're in a very consensual relationship in all ways, and you're talking about a specific sex act, you know, sometimes once you're familiar with what consent is, you could say, well, I think I want that, but I know I want to go ahead and try it with you or alone with myself. And then, you know, people have the consent to say no or to stop at any time. And that's something that people coming from our background certainly were not raised with. If you start something, you are always within your birthright to say, no, I changed my mind. Just because we're already naked and starting the process of having intercourse or whatever sexual activity you're beginning does not mean that you have to follow through until the other person says that they're good with you going. Informed consent is about really having your yes be respected all the way through, regardless of changing your mind. And sure, that can be frustrating, but it's so much healthier and better for everyone involved to be able to respect each other's yeses and respect each other's nos. And part of this, especially for people who are not practiced at consent, is about learning how to take a no really well, and learning how to respect other people in their no's and respect yourself in your no. If you're someone who's wondering why you keep on choosing to date people who are disrespectful of you or don't value you, I'm going to have to encourage you to look in the mirror and ask
Yeah.
yourself, do you know what you want? Do you say yes when you mean yes? Do you say no when you mean no, or when you're not sure? These are all parts of the conversation. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I noticed one or two of the comments of talking about how controlling the elders are. And yes, they are controlling, but unfortunately, a lot of the elders are there because they follow the guidelines. They're not allowed to think for themselves. If I get the right thing here, where is it? I can't remember where I saw it, but if an elder was to be found out to have oral sex with his wife, and we've already established from their own viewpoint that, oh, there it is there in bold, I think it is, they would not, if they had oral sex, not be allowed to serve as an elder. So
is there anything that says that it would be okay as long as they didn't get found out?
No.
Or is it just
don't
like,
be so logical.
well, this is actually a conversation I had with my ministerial servant boyfriend when I was still in the religion.
Yeah.
We were talking about potentially getting married and talking about like what would the sexuality be like and what's okay and what's not okay. And he told me that what information he had from the elders book said that as long as you don't talk about it with other people, it's okay to make those kinds of decisions within a marriage.
It really all depends on what congregation you're from.
Yeah, right? So many reasons.
Some are so strict, then you have ones that are in between being more human. It's not one rule fits every congregation.
Right.
So it's all dependent.
Again, they put the authority on the elders, the local elders of each congregation, to control their congregation and the individuals in it, which is absurd.
It is absurd. You know, so if a wife says, oh, to another JDub woman, oh, we had such a neat time and we did this and this, the friend of that wife would then feel completely guilty and she would have to go and tell the elders.
Potentially.
Potentially. It depends on how they were brought up, how they viewed the watchtower, how they viewed a lot of different things, but potentially that's it.
But let's also talk about the fact that most Jehovah's Witnesses may never have even heard that oral sex wasn't a part of what was allowed. And so they may be practicing those things without even knowing that particular act between a married couple is even a problem. So the secrecy and the strangeness around sexuality and the lack of communication and talking about it in an open way is problematic even there, because if you can have your privileges removed and your position in the congregation removed from something you didn't even know that your husband was under the guidelines and rules of, that's really messed up. That's, again, not consensual.
That's right. So back in 1978, where this question from readers was put in their watchtower, up to this day, as far as I know, that is their latest policy. They've never changed it, most probably never will change it. And so what we're seeing here, you know, we're talking, what, nearly 50 years old, 45 years, is the current policy for the JDubs, because they haven't made it any changes. It's still normal. So whether you go through one of these, in front of me I have the marriage talk when you get married. I have the a godly view of sex and marriage, the one which I never ever wanted to give, because so many elders butcher that particular outline. It used to be 2 pages, now it's 1 page, basically still saying the same thing. Whether you were in the organization years ago and you had any one of these right back in the first organization books to the new one, or
I'm not
not the new
sure.
one.
I'm not sure anyone can see that very well because we still have
Okay.
really small screens.
Small screen. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. We'll take off share screen. Thank you for telling me that.
Yeah.
Smooth that one.
There we go.
So that's one of the latest ones. It's not the very latest one. It's the one before they really stopped printing. It's mainly on the digital. Here's one of the earlier ones. Whether you've had any one of these books with regards to the organization, the policies are very similar. When it comes to relations on sex side of things, or if you want to go back, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers, I remember sitting with my father, getting to the chapter on masturbation, and my father would ask me, okay, so have you had any weird feelings? Because it was talking about weird feelings. And I just went, no.
Yeah.
I lied.
Yeah.
But my view, as far as I knew growing up as a JDub, was, uh-oh, you're going to be in trouble.
Right.
And then it went from the red book to this blue one.
That's the one I grew up with.
Okay. So both these, well, I should say, I've got them all here. All these have sentiments that when you're meant to bring your kids up, and admittedly, the guys who write these and the governing body that approves them, I think only one of them have children, what would they really appreciate or understand with having kids and what they have to deal with now? Well, I'm afraid they don't. And that's why the subject is so important. So if you didn't do those, maybe you went and you started off with this book, the first of the Happy Family Life books, or the family books. The Secret to Family Happiness was the last one. They had all these other updates.
I remember all of them.
Yeah, and all of them would give us unhealthy viewpoints with regards to sex,
Absolutely.
with regards to marriage, with regards to consent.
I don't remember them even talking about consent.
No, they don't.
It was basically just don't do it, don't talk about it, and really don't do it. Don't do it. And if you do it, you're in trouble.
And in this book, which is the guidelines for the elders, it's all the same wacky thinking.
Yeah. And now I'd love to hear from you. Why do you think it's wacky thinking? What is it that you've learned since leaving and really understanding that the mentality of that just is wacky?
Yes, I can give an answer. Why do I think? I grew up from day 4 going to the meetings to when I left. I have learned so much since that how women are treated was not what I expected until I started to speak to women once I woke up and heard their stories.
The women who came out of that culture.
Yeah. And they told me what they went through. And I could not believe it. There was times when I was going, no. I've since learned that when I was an elder, maybe I shouldn't have been, because some of my views may have been too liberal for Watchtower, because you would talk to these women and they found it very weird that I was asking, well, what help do you want? What would you like? And they would open up a little bit. Now, sometimes I was in a house, there was kids in the house, I was talking to the wife who was having a hard time. I was endeavoring to help them, but I still had the wrong view, because I still had the JDub thinking that the head of the house was the man. Then it was the wife. And now that I'm out, I realize that it's a partnership. the wife has just as much importance in the marriage as a husband. You're there working as a team. But when I was a
Unless,
JDub, forget it. I didn't have that view.
unless, of course, there are people out in the world being happy where they agree with
Yep.
informed consent of
Yep.
what that hierarchy is, and they talk it out, and they have explicit understandings and agreements about who's in charge of what,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
maybe even who calls the shots. And in
Yep.
extreme situations, when you get into understanding cultural power exchanges, family power exchanges, and places where people are engaging in power exchange with consent, you find out that the Jehovah's Witnesses are mandating a way of hierarchy that is incredibly extreme, even in those cases where people are consenting to a power hierarchy in their lives. The Jehovah's Witness model is one of the most extreme, where one person has complete authority over everyone else in the household.
It does. Like, I heard an example, and was totally random and weird to me, because when I was married to my JDub wife, my view of it was, look, if we need it, you've got the money, go do it. One of the most extreme ones I've heard is that a wife was too scared to spend $3 on a pair of stockings that she needed. And to me, that's totally crazy. It's
To me,
not
that
the way.
sounds like really familiar from back then.
Yeah, and it's just, why?
Yeah.
Women are independent, they're wonderful, and they should be given a chance to blossom. Now, the JDubs, and we looked at the question from readers, and you go through Watchtower Library, and you can see where their thinking is totally flawed, utterly disgusting in the way that they treat women in all sorts of areas, let alone on the side of a healthy view of sex. And that's why we need to start this conversation. We need to start looking at, what is a healthy view, and that's the reason for the live stream. So we want to make sure we've got it clear in mind, so that those ones, especially women, and yes, there are some males who don't quite have a good, healthy view, but we need to let everybody know what are some of the things that they can do now that they're no longer under that high control group, and be happy, having a healthy view. And that's why
Well,
I'm very grateful for you being here today.
I'm happy to be here. I felt really called to do this work and to help people from backgrounds like ours to
Cool.
be able
Okay,
to.
so you were called, which is great. Give us all a little bit of detail of what your life in the JDubs was like from when you first started, whether it was from day dot. Give us some details on what you went through to help us, from a woman's perspective, what you had to put up with, especially for the males, because sometimes the males, they're a bit dumb and we don't connect the dots, we don't understand, and we don't comprehend. We'd love to hear from your perspective what it was like.
All right, real quick. I'm pretty sure that the www needs to go after the HTTPS on the website.
We
If you
will
can check
change
that
that
while I'm
as
talking.
Yep.
And then one of the things that I was going to say before you jumped in again was that something that we need to acknowledge with a healthy perspective is that the men from our background have just as an unhealthy perspective of sexuality as the women. There was something you said that kind of indicated that maybe women had a less healthy perspective, but
No,
it's
men
for
have
all
a
of us.
less healthy perspective, definitely.
So one of the things that we all need first and foremost is to understand consent, informed consent, absolutely.
Yep.
And as I mentioned already, another thing is connecting to your intuition. And that allows you to give informed consent, because then you have an opportunity to really inform yourself of what your true desires are, what your true longings and pleasures are. If you don't know what it is that gives you pleasure, how could you fully consent with informed consent to anything? And, you know, part of that is, thanks for getting that. I appreciate it.
Sorry.
That's okay. I make technical errors all the time.
Yeah, technology. It can be
I'd
fun,
be
but if you don't do it quite right.
I'd be a Luddite if I could, but we live in such a technology-driven world, especially since the pandemic.
Yep.
So one of the things that helps people to really get in touch with their personal consent is by starting with you. When you approach yourself in a sensual way, it doesn't even have to be sexual, but when you are, let's say, putting lotion on after a shower, just tune into your body and put it on in a way that your body feels good about, instead of just like really just working it in because this is the task you need to do. Just slow down and pay attention to where does it feel good. Just, you can even do it right now. Everybody watching can just put your hands together and notice, does it feel good to touch your hand in a certain way? Does it feel better to do it like this and warm it up? Or do you like it slower and more sensual? And you can do that in your self-pleasure practices as well. So one of the things that is absolutely healthy and creates a holistic, whole self perspective and experience of sexuality is to go ahead and self-pleasure. One of the things that helps us to be whole people and understand what gives ourselves pleasure is to offer pleasure to ourselves before we share it with other people.
So what you just said there is totally different than what Watchtower would encourage young ones, husbands and wives.
Absolutely. They don't encourage masturbation at all. So going back to your question about what was life like for me growing up in that, masturbation was policed. I was raised in the religion as a third generation Jehovah's Witness. And I had 4 siblings, one of which was a sister, and we shared a bedroom. And whenever I was doing anything as a small child that my sister could tell on me for that seemed to be sexual, she would shout out to my parents, and everyone in the house could hear that she was telling on me for being sexual. And, you know, like if I was bouncing on the bed in some way. And I remember that there was plenty of times where there had nothing to do with a sexual feeling for me. She would just yell out, "Serena's humping the bed." So it was a bizarre situation where you're growing up with this thing where not only are the elders in the congregation policing the members of the congregation, but the members of the family are policing the masturbation and sexual activity of each other. So, you know, what comes to mind is the kind of thing that reminds me of the stories we grew up on about Nazi Germany, where you had informants. You know, we grew up in this intense culture of informants where you feel like you have to police your own friends and your own family members, especially around something like sexuality. So in my life, where specifically I'll focus on sexuality because that's the topic today, but I didn't even masturbate until I was in my 20s. I didn't do any of that. I was incredibly dedicated to the religion. I was incredibly dedicated to Jehovah and what I thought he was and what I thought the religion was. I was an incredibly high achieving good girl. I used to pioneer before I even got baptized. I got baptized as young as 13 years old, which people from the religion know that that's a really young age. People often are more closer to mid-teens, late teens when they get baptized. And it was just, you know, baptism isn't just like, you know, most of the people watching are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses perhaps, but for those who aren't, baptism as a Jehovah's Witness is supposed to be your personal choice. And when you do it, you are agreeing to follow all of the rules and mandates of the religion until the day that you die, or you make it through Armageddon into paradise. So with that in mind, it's a really huge commitment for a child to make, that they will follow all of those rules for the rest of their lives. It's something that you really, again, with consent coming in, I really don't think that you can ask a child that to dedicate their lives to God at a young age before they even have gone through puberty and know what life is about, or, you know, so many different things. But I did decide to do that. And I remember telling my mom that I was worried that maybe I wouldn't be able to hold up all of those things forever, all the time, as a teenager and going forward. And she said that when you dedicate your life to Jehovah, he helps you to keep those mandates. And so that convinced me, and I did it. And I really, you know, I wanted to do it in a way that was partly because I just was dedicated to being as faithful and as good a person as I could be. And in that world, that's what that meant. And I also wanted to do it to, like, you know, a little competitively, to be more high achieving and get farther faster. And that's a silly reason to dedicate your life to anything. But
definitely is.
There it is. So
cool.
after baptism, you know, I continued putting in pioneer hours, auxiliary pioneer hours, you know, during summers when school was off and stuff. And I was, from a young age, I was encouraged to pursue a missionary career, and I was on that track. I was dedicated to it. I became a pioneer officially. Later, after baptism, I was an auxiliary pioneer, and then I did the full-time pioneering as soon as I was out of high school, which turned out to be 2 years of college at the end, because where I was living, there was a program where you could skip high school and go to college for the last 2 years of high school and get dual credit. So that was an unexpected experience, especially coming from our background where they have this, I don't know what it's at now, but back then it was absolutely not okay to get secondary education outside of high school. It was very against the rules and absolutely against the culture. If you were going to college, if you were going to college, it was like, well, what are you even doing calling yourself a Jehovah's Witness? Which is so absurd. But so I didn't date anybody. I didn't, you know, people at school asked me out. Brothers showed interest, age appropriate most of the time, showed interest. And I didn't, you know, I was like, well, I'm not allowed to date. And there were boys I had crushes on at school. And I also, you know, this might be radical for some of the people viewing who are freshly out or still thinking about getting out, but when I was in the religion, I questioned whether maybe I was a lesbian. And I didn't even think about bisexuality or pansexuality, which is a total reality and a complete, you know, norm within different cultures in our mainstream culture outside of those religions now. But even back in the day, if you were not in the religions like that, it still wasn't something that was highly talked about or known, the pansexuality and bisexuality. So I just thought, well, I'm kind of worried about that. I'm kind of like, it makes me really uncomfortable to think about that. And so I would just let myself off the hook because I was so clearly attracted to males. And so I would just think, oh, well, I'm good. I'm fine. I don't have to worry that I'm wrong somehow because I'm attracted to men. So then it was only after leaving the religion at 23 that I had the freedom, because I had already lost everything. I lost my entire family. I lost everyone I'd ever been close to. And I had a big family, and we were really involved in the religion. They all still are for the most part. And if they're not still involved, most still believe in it and are taught in the programming. So I still don't have my family in my life, but it has given me this freedom to be my authentic true self. And once I had that freedom at 23, it was within a year that I realized I was bisexual. And it still wasn't comfortable. It still wasn't something that I was like, yay, I can celebrate and be proud. It was something I was still really, really uncomfortable with. And, you know, I know there are many people who were raised as Jehovah's Witnesses and other types of high control backgrounds that are just, they don't have a choice. They're not bisexual. They don't have that spectrum fluidity that I do. And they are really only attracted to people who are of the same sex. And living in a culture like that, where what you are is completely denied and you're told that it's just bad and you're a bad person for feeling that way, it's just a terrible, terrible way to live. It's so shaming. So in addition to not touching myself, not self-pleasuring in a sexual way, I allowed myself to make out with someone who I was friends with when I was around 20. And I had an amazing sacred sexual experience that I had no words for. Our clothes stayed on the whole time. We were kissing and holding each other. And I had a Kundalini awakening at 20, years before I even heard the term sacred sexuality. And for those of you who have no idea what a Kundalini awakening is or what sacred sexuality is, I'll just explain briefly that it was like this amazing, powerful lightning bolt that generated from within my body and shot out the top of my head. And it seized my body and threw me into an arched back. And it was extremely, excruciatingly painful for a bit. And I had this experience of just complete harmony and oneness with the world, where my self-identity was completely gone. I didn't feel like I was an individual anymore. And then it just felt incredibly pleasurable. And again, to remind you, I had never masturbated. I had never had an orgasm. I didn't know what that was. And, you know, it's basically the most massive orgasm ever experienced by humanity, that type of experience. And I don't know that everyone's Kundalini awakening experiences are the same. And the truth is that it's pretty rare for people to have Kundalini awakening experiences. And I was still in the religion. This was 3 years before I took the risk of stepping outside of it to see if it was real, if the religion was real. So at 20, having that massive experience, not knowing what an orgasm felt like, not knowing what sacred sex was, not knowing anything about the word Kundalini, let alone the experience of a Kundalini awakening, it was just incredibly confusing. And after the pain subsided, and I was just in this massive afterglow, which I think most of us have probably had orgasms by now who are watching this sort of thing. So afterglow being that lovely, sweet, glorious, like glowing softness that happens after orgasm. And that afterglow lasted for days. And then the friend who I was with, that I was making out with when that happened, called me a couple days later and was like, "Hey, did you have an orgasm?" And I paused on the phone and just was silent and checked in with myself about it. And I was like, I don't know what an orgasm is. Did I have an orgasm? I don't know. I mean, I've never had sex. Our clothes were on. We weren't touching each other in that area at all. You know, I just went with, I know that if I say yes, we're going to be in trouble. But since I don't know, I'm going to say no. And so I said no. And I believed it enough because I just didn't know. And there was no one I could talk to and ask. And it didn't feel terribly much like a lie. It just felt like, well, I have no idea. So no, because if I say maybe, then we're going to get hauled into the elders' back room in the Kingdom Hall and have this big long lecture and have all these inquisitive, inquiring questions about what it is we did. And what a nightmare. I had never been Oh no, I had a conversation with elders before about something like this because someone had touched my breast.
Ooh.
I felt bad. I
Yeah,
hadn't done anything wrong. And I went in and talked to the elders, and I was like, I put myself in this position where a man touched my breast. Can I still be a pioneer? That's the kind of culture we're coming from.
that's right.
I didn't even do anything. It was
Yep,
the man who did something.
yep.
And, I think that ended up being a black mark on my record and, strike one, which is ridiculous because
It is.
it's crazy. But that was the situation. And I
Yeah, it
had
was.
never, you know, dated anyone. I'd never went to a school dance or snuck out and hung out with somebody or did anything. This was like after I was living on my own at 20, and I decided to kiss someone who I had known for years and was also a brother in good standing while I was a pioneer. It was like, as far as standards of crazy things that can happen, making out with someone that you care about deeply and have known for years is not the most crazy thing to do
Not really.
by the time you're 20.
Well, it
So,
depends if you're a circuit overseer. Just going back to what you were talking about, where somebody touched your breast. A circuit overseer here in New Zealand, he was going around the circuit talking about clothed rooting.
oh, wow.
So it is something that people do talk about behind the scenes, and elders do talk about it. Circuit
I don't
overseer
even know.
definitely.
I don't even know what that term means. Clothed rooting? Is that a New Zealand kind of term, or is it like?
You answer that for me. I have no idea, but apparently it's touching parts without removing clothes.
I think they call it heavy petting.
Well,
Where
that's what the circuit overseer called it. So it just
clothed
tells you how
rooting,
unhealthy it is.
the viewpoint of their
Hmm.
perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not the act, but yeah, their viewpoint.
yeah. It's a bizarre place to look at from the outside. And when I left at 23, I was leaving in part because I was just like, I've given up everything that gives me joy.
Yeah.
I'm a joyless person and I feel like committing suicide. So if
Mm.
and in order to change my life and get further in my ministerial career, I have to get married. I can't be a missionary without a husband. I can't be an elder's wife without a husband.
Yeah.
I can't be, I can't advance in my ministerial career unless I gave my personal bodily authority over to some guy. And I didn't know anyone in my life, man or woman, young or old, who I was ready to give that kind of authority to. And I was an old maid at 23 in that culture.
23.
Yeah.
Mm.
Because I wasn't dating. Well, I had dated somebody when I was 21. The man that
Okay.
I mentioned who had said that oral sex would be okay when we got married as long as we didn't tell anybody about it. I was like, okay, that sounds like norm. Like that sounds totally normal for our world. At the
Yep.
time, I was like, sure, okay, I get that. That, to someone outside of a religion like that, that sounds insane. But coming from where we were in context, it sounded totally like normal experience in that world. Like
Mm.
certain things are okay as long as you never ever talk about them. Certain things are not okay, and if you don't talk about them or ever get caught,
Yep.
then maybe you can get away with them. And
Yeah.
then a whole slew of things are not okay at all, and you know it, and you have to confess if you ever do it and go get reprimanded in
Yeah.
private or in public if anyone else finds out about it. So coming from that kind of intense hierarchy, intense high control culture, it's amazing to step outside of it and get to a place where you have self-sovereignty and autonomy. And if you don't know what self-sovereignty is, you can start by simply learning about consent. But self-sovereignty is understanding that you are the person who has control over your own life, your own decisions, and you can stand in your own authority and power in your life for all of your decisions for yourself, and also to stand in that power before giving that power away to others to make decisions for you. And when you believe in a book that knows better than you do, if you still believe in the Bible, which I believe it exists, but I don't believe it is an authority over my life. When you believe that there is a book or a person or a being outside of you that is going to have a better decision than you, then you're not quite at the full self-sovereignty.
All right.
And from that place of freedom and self-sovereignty, you can decide with full consent who you give that authority to or not.
Yeah. That's totally random if you're a former JDub coming out just recently, or a JDub.
And by random, I think you mean strange, right?
Strange. Yeah,
It's
sorry.
bizarre.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you just for a minute tell us, we've had one or two comments pop up with regards to bi, pan, all the other orientations. Can you just list some of them so that we know what sort of things are out there?
Well, sexuality is a spectrum and gender is a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is people are more complex than just labeling them as men and women, girls and boys.
Yep.
There are genuinely people who are physically and or internally emotionally not fully identified with the gender roles that we assign in our culture. So the truth is, and if you look at a lot of spirituality from the East, you'll find that there's a teaching that of yin and yang. That's very familiar to most of us.
Yep.
That yin and yang are representations of feminine and masculine energy, of dark and light, of just the balance of opposites within a whole. So for a lot of people, they recognize that they're not 100% masculine on the outside and or on the inside. They recognize that they aren't 100% feminine on the inside or the outside or both. And so when you're talking about that, that is a territory where in the empowered sexuality conversations that are happening these days in sex positive communities and sacred sexuality communities, we're talking about these as ways of identifying where people use different pronouns. So me personally, I use the pronouns she, her, but I also use they, them, because I am a very masculine energy person. And I identify very strongly with my feminine. And I also identify very strongly with my masculine. And I don't mind if someone calls me she, her, he, him, or they, them. But for some people, it's very important for their pronouns to be respected because they have been forced into a role simply by their anatomy and by the way that their parents or the doctor assigned them that role by looking at their body and saying, oh, you will live as a female woman. You will live as a male, as a man. And in our world today, there is so much more understanding of the fact that people don't fit into these binary dual roles. There's a spectrum, just like there's a spectrum of bisexuality, pansexuality, heterosexuality, and homosexuality. So all of those things are the spectrum that people talk about when they're saying who they're attracted to and who they want to have sex with or be romantic with.
Yep.
And, for me personally, I identify these days as pansexual. And it's not about the experiences I've had. It's about whether I'm attracted to or either sexually or romantically. And those are two different categories for people to discuss and talk about and get more specific with. But, you know, on the extreme, there are people who are like just attracted to people of their same sex. And there are people who are just attracted to people of the opposite sex. And then there are people who are identified as bisexual who are attracted to both of those. And then there are people who identify as pansexual, like I do, who understand that it's way more complex than that if you're looking at an individual for who they are and not what their gender is.
Yep.
And I could be and have been attracted to people who are not just male or female or, you know, in that heteronormative binary structure, but people who are more gender fluid, or as the phrase I use on my website a lot is gender expansive. So whether you feel like you're born into a female body and have a masculine center, or whether you are born into a female body and feel like you have a feminine center, these are all words that help us to identify and recognize the differences in those areas so that we can understand ourselves and communicate with the world in the way that we wish to.
Okay. Well,
And
I learned
it
a
also,
few things there.
great. And it also brings up asexuality and demisexuality, which is a couple of terms that have come out of the conversations in the sex positive communities where people identify as asexual. And that can be a spectrum within itself. So often I had thought that asexual meant that people were just not sexual at all. Maybe they didn't even masturbate, but I thought that it definitely meant that they just didn't want to have sex with someone outside of themselves. There are people who only enjoy masturbation as a sexual activity. They don't ever want or have inclination and really the desire to join with someone else in that activity. And then that community developed more language around this type of idea, and people have begun to use the word demisexual, which indicates people who really can't, you know, they just don't have sexual feelings towards an individual until they have gotten to know them very well. And that also can be a spectrum. So when we take it out of the two-dimensional, from the binary and black and white, dark and light, good and bad realm that we were entrenched in and programmed with, there's this whole multicolor rainbow, you know, five-dimensional world out here that we need words to be able to explore and understand. And a lot of people like me, once we get out of the high control restrictions and threats of losing our families and our basic needs being taken care of, we can begin to question, what do I really feel? If now that I'm in a place where I'm not going to be punished for just feeling or thinking, let yourself feel, let yourself think, let yourself feel good. Focus on gratitude. That's one of the biggest tips I've got for everybody in this background, is make a daily practice of writing down, because it entrenches new patterns in your brain. Take a hand and put a pen or pencil in it and put on paper things you're grateful for every day, like at least one a day. And it will change your brain chemistry so that you can go from a deep, deep trench of negativity and gloom and doom and Armageddon and destruction and judgment to creating a trench of goodness and positivity, and creating that deeper ravine and flow so that you can have easier access to feeling happy and joy and bliss and ecstasy. And being self-caring in an embodied way includes masturbation and sexuality. And, you know, being careful about that is important.
So you've mentioned a lot of things, like I hadn't heard of some of the, like the demi, I've heard of asexual, but I didn't know the differences. So thank you very much. So those ones who are possibly sitting here listening, maybe they believe in the Bible. What would you encourage them in the way of having a healthy viewpoint of what you've just said?
for people who believe in the Bible, I think that there are plenty of ways that you can still embrace this idea. If you don't believe that sex outside of marriage is okay. I mean, people who believe in the Bible believe many different things. That's also a spectrum, right? Like
Yeah.
people who believe in the Bible have all kinds of different views on sex.
Yep.
And some religions are completely okay with homosexuality and pansexuality and transsexuality and transgender realities. But I can't really speak to all of those. But I think that it's good to simply start asking yourself, if I was honest, if I didn't have repercussions in my life for being honest with myself, who am I really? What are my real feelings? What are my true desires?
Yeah.
And a big part of that is incredibly deep self-compassion. Because if you can't have compassion for yourself the way you would for a small child that you love, then you won't be able to look at the things that you're afraid of.
Yep.
So that's also something that I teach people, is how to have deep self-compassion and an embodied, physically felt experience of self-care and self-love. And I'm not just talking about masturbation. I do teach hot self-sex classes and workshops, but aside from that, there are things that I teach that have a lot more to do with simply being in touch with being able to enjoy life and be able to feel pleasure in your body, regardless of connection to sexuality. Because what happens with people from backgrounds like ours is we focus on the pain in our bodies and we get stuck in a pain cycle. And I went through a decade of disability because I was stuck in a pain cycle, because I wasn't embracing my pleasure. And even after leaving the religion, it was very difficult for me to get to the place where I could get that positive flow going. And I didn't listen to people who told me to do a gratitude practice. I just thought, you couldn't possibly understand my life. You think happiness is a choice, and that is messed up. Like, how dare you accuse me of choosing to be unhappy and in pain? That is so wrong and so hurtful to hear. But on the other side of it, 20 years out of that religion, I'm here to tell you it's real. Happiness is genuinely a choice. And I can show you the way, and other people can show you the way. But it really takes a level of trust. I didn't trust anybody telling me to do gratitude practices until my childhood friend, Joanna, had given me a book that had the word gratitude on it. And she gave me a book and a pen, and she just said, this could really help you. You just need to write down things you're grateful for every day. And I let it sit there forever. And then I called her and I was complaining again about life stuff. And she was like, are you writing in the book? And I was like, no. And she's like, give it a try. So that changed my life. I did it for years, and I didn't have much guidance that I trusted or much more tips and information about how to do that, or how to get beyond just a gratitude list, or how to embody my gratitude, like how to feel it physically in myself. I didn't know, and I didn't have a guide that could bring me that information and hold my hand or shine the light ahead. So that's what I'm standing up to do for people in this experience with the free range sex movement, is I'm saying, here I am. I know what it's like, and it's hard. It's hard as hell. So if you're ready, I want to help.
Okay, so while we're on that subject of hard as hell, questions come in.
Great.
Could you please talk about what is the sexual norm with dating, etc., outside of the organization? People coming out from JDubs and thrown into a world that they have no idea of how to develop relationships or ideas like friends with benefits.
Well, the truth is there's no one answer to that. It's a complex world. And what's important is that you go ahead and open yourself to learning about what your body wants and what your heart wants, and connecting your body's wisdom to your consciousness. Most of us have that in our subconscious, and connecting your heart's wisdom to your consciousness. That's something I help people with too. But once you have your inner guidance system, you'll be able to navigate these types of things and how to date so much better. One of the things that you need to understand is that sex is about pleasure. It's not just about disease and pregnancy. And, the sex education that we got, if we got any, was often just, here's how to not get a disease, here's how to not get pregnant, and here's what happens at puberty a little bit. Like, they gave us a little bit of information about all those, all based on fear. And what we need is sex education that is based on love and pleasure and respect and consent, informed consent. So when you're trying to go from specifically a space where you believed that you shouldn't have sex outside of marriage, and you're going into what has specifically been mentioned, which is a friends with benefits experience, it takes a lot of self-knowledge to navigate that in a way that is going to help you and benefit you. And a lot of communication and a lot of communication skills need to be figured out. So if you're not used to communicating with yourself or your friends about sex, then it is going to be really hard to navigate a friends with benefits situation, because you need to be able to talk about it to have explicit consent.
All right. So hopefully that's answered that question for Suzette.
Am I still moving and being heard on that end? Because my screen has frozen.
I can still hear you.
Okay, let me see if I can.
And I can see you moving on both my screens. She's run away for the moment. I want to say thank you to everybody who's putting in their thoughts, and it's great to see the comments coming in. While we're on that subject, if you do have any questions that you would like to get an answer to, Serena's here, and it would be very helpful to help you understand things. While you gave that comment, Serena, can you hear us?
Yep, I'm back.
Okay.
And I've got full functionality going on here.
Cool. Suzette wanted to say thank you for what you said.
Did that help, Suzette? Because, if you have a follow-up question, please do ask.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, no, she's... right, we'll get rid of that one.
It is really confusing to go from the background we came from, where nothing's okay, to a world where you have to decide on your own rules and self-navigate. It's incredibly disorienting. And I wished so many times for so many years that there was someone I could trust who could just tell me what to do again, because it's overwhelming when you're disconnected from your own intuition, your own inner knowledge, your own sage wisdom. It is so difficult, which is why I'm excited to help people connect to that.
And we're grateful that you've taken this course to help so many people. It's definitely needed. There's so much. I think it was Ben talked about. Let's see if we can find Ben's comment. How far back was it?
I will just talk briefly about someone I know who a client was talking about coming out of a similar background in the Mormon religion, and they were saying, they were watching, like, they were single for the first time in years. They'd been married and then they were divorced, and they were just like, well, what's it like out there? Like, which of the women from Sex and the City will I be? And they felt like so overwhelmed and so confused about what dating life and sex life might be like now that they are not completely committed to just one person, and they wanted to explore. And I told them not to worry so much, because when you do it, when you are dating in alignment with who you really are, the people who you match well with will be in your life. Your decisions will be something that you are comfortable with. It's
Yep.
not like you have to suddenly become Samantha from Sex and the City, and you don't have to be Carrie Fisher. It just all these different things. I mean, that might be the wrong word, but I mean the wrong name. I'm not great at the names of famous people. It was never
That's
something we were encouraged to remember growing up. I'm not good at it still.
that's right. Yeah, Ben
Bradshaw,
was.
that was it. Carrie Fisher's like Princess Leia, right? Carrie
Well,
Bradshaw's the character
it's
from
good, Star Wars. Got to
Star
have a
Wars.
Star Wars connection.
Great. So, is this a question as well?
No, what Ben was saying here, he talked about a graph to me a couple of days ago, and
Oh, great.
showing the support or the benefit and the need to have a good sex, healthy view sex, and it is part of our life.
Absolutely.
And so, just looking on that subject, what happens if we find that we really struggle with sex, full stop?
What happens if we find that we really struggle with sex?
What can we do?
It depends on the reason. It depends
Mm-hmm.
on the root a bit. And we don't have to know exactly why. But some of what happens when people struggle with sex at all is that there's just a lot of shame there. And shame is poison.
Yeah.
It's healthy for everyone to have just a bit of shame, because if you don't have any shame whatsoever, you're a sociopath, you're a psychopath. But if you look at Brene Brown's research on shame, you'll find a lot about that. She's an amazing researcher and storyteller who talks a lot about how harmful shame is and how we all need to heal our shame. So with sex, shame is something that we were raised with. We were, it is just part of the culture in such an extreme way, even compared to mainstream shame. It is really potent from the Jehovah's Witness culture.
Yeah.
So learning that deep self-compassion that I was talking about, that will help. That's a place to start.
Yep.
And learning how to do grief work is also something that will help. And what is grief work?
I was just going to ask that question.
Yeah, I can see it on your face. A lot of people don't know. A lot of people outside the religion don't know either. In our culture, in mainstream society, even globally, we don't have a practice of embracing grief. And when we have a container and a way of allowing ourselves to set aside time for intentionally being sad and angry and moving through those feelings in a healthy way, we empty out the compost bin, right? Like it's emotional metabolism.
Okay.
If we have emotional metabolism, it's a lot like our food. We have things come in, we feed ourselves, there's some excess stuff that we don't need, and we know how to, in a healthy way, eliminate it. We also know how, in a healthy way, to restrict what we allow in. So in some ways, we know about that as people raised as Jehovah's Witnesses. They told us to be really careful about what we allowed in our minds, in our, not so much in our bodies. I was never taught really great healthy food habits, but we were definitely taught to restrict what we take into our minds and how to control our minds, how to control what we think, and how to control what we feel. Now, coming from that background, that was a terribly abusive and controlling, brainwashing, programming way to grow up. And a silver lining is that we know how to control our thoughts and our feelings. And now we can use that superpower that we exercised during that experience of growing up in that, or being in it for so long, to put it to good use for our own healing in a way that we want to. So now we know how to control what we think about. Are we thinking about gloom and doom still? Are we focused on what's negative? Like you've made this channel that is so different from a lot of other ex-Jehovah's Witness information that focuses on positivity. And it's such a gift to all of us to have a place where ex-Jehovah's Witnesses can come and talk about what's good. What are we focusing on that's positive? How do we get from back there to a place where we're really happy and we are daring to dream and have a good life? Before you can have a good life and live your dream, you have to be able to dare to dream. And that gratitude practice really comes in. And learning how to give yourself deep self-compassion, being able to look at yourself in the mirror, in the eyes, and just be like, whatever emotion is coming up right now is welcome. And then another part of you holds that piece and is just talk to yourself in that aching moment. I love you. I care about you. This is okay. We're going to get through this. All those things you would say to a friend, look right in your eyes in the mirror and say it to yourself. And if you don't know how, I do teach people how to do that as well. And it can be
a very practical thing.
It can be so painful, so painful when you've never done that, when you've never been taught how to do that. It is really a challenging road to go from where we came from to being able to be a wholly healthy, holistically joyful person. It is
absolutely.
And I really, when I realized that I could do this work for people coming from backgrounds like ours, I was in the same instant mortified and joyful, holding that paradox and the mystery of that completely. And I cried, and I happened to be looking in the mirror at the time. I was doing some of my own self-care work and grief work. And I just was like, oh man, this is going to be hard. And it's going to be one of the most self-healing things I could possibly ever do for myself.
Yeah. Thank you very much for those practical things you just mentioned there. Looking in the mirror, it's not easy. We've got another question come in, and this one is from Josh. And Josh wants to know, any thoughts on porn? It's something I've always carried a huge amount of shame about. In fact, it was the reason I was disfellowshipped. Yep, softcore, vanilla, heterosexual porn. Apparently everyone does it in the world, but it's something I really struggle to find a healthy balance with. What would your encouragement be?
Porn can cause a lot of problems. And porn isn't in itself a horrible, terrible, bad thing to indulge in once in a while. It can disconnect you from human connection. It can disconnect you from, taking the time and effort to be sexual with someone outside of yourself. And it can also take from your own personal self-love connection, which I teach about in Hot Self Sex. You can have hot self sex without pornography. And it can be a real crutch to watch pornography, but in itself, there's nothing shameful about looking at porn. And it's something that almost everybody does if they are embracing of sexuality in a shameless way. If you shed shame, if you don't feel shameful about it, you actually might watch less porn because you might not have that tension of, ooh, this is bad and I shouldn't do it. And so it feels extra good to, have that guilty pleasure. But porn can be a problem even for people who are embracing a sex positive view. It can be a problem because it can be somewhat addictive. I won't say that it is addictive because research shows that it's not a genuine addiction, but it can be really habit forming in a way that prevents you from functioning in your life. So addictive things are definitely put into a category of like, well, a glass of wine is okay, but if you need it to get by, then you got to look at addiction. So it can also create, porn can also create a situation where you have desensitized your genitals to the point where you don't have arousal or you don't have ability to climax without the aid of pornography, or even for some people, sexual aids or toys. You know, when I say sexual aids, I'm not talking about AIDS and HIV. I'm talking about sex toys. So it looks like that was received. And did that answer the question for you?
That actually came from another person, but
Oh, okay.
it obviously answered a question for somebody.
For somebody.
so that's good.
So Josh, if you have a follow-up question, please do ask.
Okay, we've just had another one come in. It's late, but how can, so just looking back on some of the things we've talked about, how can someone have a healthy attitude towards sex if they've been sexually abused as a child?
That's a really important and sensitive and common question. Having abuse as a child definitely complicates and hurts things for people. And there is beautiful, healthy, vibrant sexuality after that. And embracing the grief work is really key. You really need to feel those feelings and let it out in a safe container, which includes being able to, you know, talk to a professional, someone in addition to myself as an adult sexuality educator and intuitive sexuality guide. Someone who's dealing with coming out of sexual abuse definitely needs to talk to a mental health professional, which I am not.
Okay. Yep.
So and find one that you can trust
Yeah.
as well to guide you through this. And in addition to that, if you've already done that, part of the healing process is definitely going to be a lot of self-compassion and self-love, and making new experiences for yourself where you have positive associations with your body and with your sensuality, not even sexuality. Just start with pleasure of any kind, making positive memories and experiences for yourself that involve your body, and being able to rewrite the programming in your mind and giving yourself positive, affirmative conversation in your head about those things. And I don't want to minimize the impact of childhood sexual abuse, because it is extremely difficult to live with, and you can overcome it. You can live into a space of healing where you do have a very happy and very fulfilling sexual life with yourself, possibly just with yourself first, which is what I recommend for everyone, regardless of abuse history or not. And again, I feel like I might be a little bit of a broken record, but learning how to connect with not only your intellectual, cerebral capacity to navigate life, but also your heart and your body. And learning how to listen to those parts of yourself is key to healing, because your body has a lot of information for you about how to move beyond the trauma.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that's helped the one who put the question forward. Another one's come in, just going back to porn for a minute.
Why do people get involved with porn?
Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons could be that it's easy. You don't have to talk to somebody or, you know, navigate a whole relationship in order to be stimulated by seeing someone naked. Some people look at porn because they think it's educational and they don't know anything about sex. And some people look at porn because it just popped up on the internet and it looked interesting, and some desire in them was being, you know, brought to life, and they followed the link. You know, there's a lot of reasons that people look at porn. And I don't know about if what you're talking about is getting involved with porn, like as a professional. I'm not sure I could totally answer that, but I imagine what the question was more like, why do people use pornography? So some people, you know, even married people, will use it together as a way to stimulate the sexual feelings so that they can get in the mood. And you know, there's nothing wrong with all those things. It's really what works for you, what feels healthy for you, what resonates and is in alignment with your body, your heart, your mind, and your personal choices for your life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Well, Josh has come back. He said, in my case, it was a lack of education and taboo, which made it fascinating. I was bullied throughout school for being gay due to not having a girlfriend, due to being, my thing keeps rolling up, a JDub. Porn became a place to prove I wasn't gay.
That's really understandable. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Now, we also had, if I can find it, if people are wondering why my head's going backwards and forwards, sometimes the name is not showing up in its Facebook user. So I look to my Facebook and then I go backwards and forwards. So that's the reason why.
Some people might want to remain anonymous anyway, so that's okay.
Yeah. Yep.
I work with a lot of confidential information, and if you see someone's name on my website or in my materials, it's because they gave me written permission to use those. And again, that's just another part of full consent that I practice.
Yeah. So Rocky said, I find porn educational because I have limited knowledge about sex as a JDub.
Well, Rocky, I'm just going to have to tell you that pornography is not a sexual education. It is a sexual miseducation. And I'd like to recommend that you check out the website Make Love, Not Porn. It is real people who are sharing their sex lives on camera with full consent. And it is real sex, not pornographic industry, not porn industry sex as it is typically understood. It's not a script with, different roles that are assigned. It's real people engaging in consent, engaging in loving relationships, and it's real sex, not fake sex or just sex for show. There's so much about pornography that is just not reality. And I'm going to name something graphically because if you're looking at porn as a male and you think you're getting an education, a lot of porn displays men having their ejaculation all over the woman's face. And then guys think, oh, that's what women want. And that's what part of sex is. But I'm here to tell you, hardly any women want that and don't find it enjoyable. And you really need to have consent before you do something like that. So there's a lot of misinformation.
Yeah. So that Make Love Not Porn, is that the title of the webpage, a book?
It is. Make Love Not Porn is a website. And you can actually buy a subscription to different people's videos of themselves having sex. And there's different types, and but you'll be getting more of a real information about authentically genuine sexuality as opposed to pornography, which is like looking at sitcoms and dramas to find out what life is supposed to be like. If I looked at the Cosbys and Leave It to Beaver as a way for an example of what I thought family life was supposed to really be like, it would be really weird. And it is jarring to think that everyone else's family life is this perfect experience and this really awesome thing. And then in reality, everybody has problems and everybody has conflicts, and it's Leave It to Beaver is just not an example of a real family, and pornography is not a real example of sex.
Yep. Somebody just said this with regards to that connection.
Great.
So that's good. So if anybody hasn't got any more questions, I want to say thank you very much for being here and helping us to clear up some of the misinformation that is out there.
It's my pleasure.
It's certainly me good. Now, for those who are on the live stream today, this will not be the last time we look at having a healthy view of sex. It's like every subject with regards to the JDubs, it's like peeling an onion. You peel off one layer, maybe 2 layers. We come right for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, there's another issue we need to deal with. There's another subject that we need to get our heads around.
It's true.
So it's like we've talked about fear, we've talked about guilt. Today we're talking about a healthy view of sex. Somebody just, you'll have to agree with this one or not, but let's put it up.
Oh yeah, I'd love to come back. You know, as you were talking, I was thinking, we didn't talk about
I know.
BDSM or kink or fetishes or any type of fantasy yet, because this is a huge topic. It's gigantic. And polyamory, we didn't talk about that. There are so many areas of sexuality that are being explored in really healthy ways.
Yeah.
That sound absolutely absurd to people coming from our background. Like, why in the world would bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism, BDSM, be something that could be done in a healthy way? That's a good question to leave perhaps for next time.
I would never like to hazard a guess on that one.
Well, I'll give you a clue. It has a lot to do with consent.
Okay.
Are all parties involved consenting and genuinely wanting what's happening?
Yeah.
And in that case, is it healthy or not?
All right. A few more little comments directed at you, Serena.
You're all very welcome. Thank you for being here and listening and putting your questions and comments up.
Yep. We really have appreciated it. You've made the live stream wonderful, and we've got to keep talking about it. Your advice, your practical understanding, Serena, great.
Thank you.
So
we've
been part one, yeah. We're going to have more of these. So what, I know we've been putting up your web page, your address there. We put it in the comments.
Thank you.
Is that the best way to get hold of you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there's also a presence on Facebook. Please do join the growing community there. The Facebook group is called the Free Range Sex Movement, and there is a business page on Facebook called Free Range Sex. There's also the YouTube channel, which will be having more interviews of me interviewing other people who are sex positive and educators and health professionals who help people in sex positive ways. Yeah. And the YouTube channel is called Free Range Sex. And are you game to put those in the comments, or not the comments, but the information below the video?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We'll put that on YouTube, but we'll also put the comments throughout so that everybody can have access. So guys and gals, if you like what you've heard with Serena, if you feel you would love to have some help, touch base with Serena. She'll be happy to help.
I'm actually just starting a brand new program for spring that is specifically for women and gender expansive individuals.
Yep.
So please check out the website. When you sign up for the newsletter on the homepage, it will give you instant access to information about that program. And it is the Intuitive Sexuality Confidence Program for spring 2021. Oh, there's my website.
There's the webpage.
Working on it like crazy.
Okay, so there's the join here, and go through and sign up for the newsletter and other things that you've heard Serena talk about. And I should scroll all the way down so we can see what the webpage is all like.
Wonderful. This is the section that has recommendations from other people who've already worked for me, or with me, rather.
So yeah, check that out.
Again, there is confidentiality respected on here. You'll notice that a lot of the comments don't have names with them. That's because people said, yes, please go ahead and use my quote, but don't use my name. And I respect that 100%. Great. What you share with me in private will be kept private.
Well, we're glad you've shared a lot today. That's all I can say. Thank you once again. Thank you for everybody who's been on the live stream, for those who put comments or those who just watched. Just to let you know what our live stream next week is going to be about, it's talking to a qualified gentleman called Ryan Lee. He's a psychotherapist, and he's going to be helping us to look at the aspect of narcissists. How, what, why. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to be able to make a note of them, be able to join and find out what a narcissist is all about.
Narcissism is definitely something everyone from our background should learn about.
Absolutely.
I learned about it a bit late, many years after coming out, and I can tell you that everybody coming from our background really needs to learn about it, for sure.
Yep. And that subject is chosen because while we have a list of different things that we've gone through, I asked Ryan specifically, so what subject do you find that most to JDubs that go to him? And he said 80% is narcissistic behavior. So just to give you a bit of background, Ryan's actually in our group. He's going to be helping us, not on the weekend. It will be Monday Peru time. He's an American. He's qualified not only as an JDub, he's also qualified in the psychotherapist field. And he will be coming to us, which I'll put the time up. It's just slipping my head at the moment, but it'll be Tuesday morning here in New Zealand. But we look forward to seeing another wonderfully practical live stream and the practicality we've had today. Once again, thank you, Serena. Thank you, everybody, for being here, for putting the questions up, and we look forward to seeing you again on another live stream. Until then, keep safe, and we'll see you again soon.
Have a great night, everybody.